Okay, thank you very much for joining us again for Talmud in Technicolor. The Gemara we're dealing with today really is very apt in relation to the season we're in. We've just got through lamenting the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash in our Tisha B'Av keynote yesterday. And today we'll be dealing in quite some detail, not on destruction, but on the construction of the Beis HaMikdash. So we'll be looking at some of the plans, if you like, the architect's plans, particularly focusing on the Mizbeach, the altar in which the korbanos were burnt and various other rituals were carried out. So we'll look at that into quite some detail, and we'll even go underground, under the Mizbeach. We'll do some archaeological digging. So today's share is going to be a bit unusual. This particular Perek, the next, do have a few little treats in terms of the structure of various kelim of the Mishkan, of the Beis HaMikdash, and we'll be looking at those. I'm just going to share my screen with you. Perhaps I should first say where we're going to start. We will be starting to take up the Gemara on Daf Mem Chet Amud Beis 48b, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or maybe 8 or 9 lines from the bottom. The fourth Perek, 48b, and it's a quote from the Mishnah. Umenukovim kamin shtei chotmin v'chulu. Those are the last words on the line. We'll really start from the next line, which is lema masnisim. So that's 8 or so lines from the bottom. Lema masnisim Rabbi Yehudahi. But I need to go back and give you a little bit of a review, because with this review we'll be able to go forward. So let me share screen. Okay. You remember we were talking about the ceremony of the Mayim and the Yayin that were libated onto the top of the Mizbeach for the days of Sukkot, where every day they used to take the water up from the Shiloach pool up to the top, up to Har HaBayit, and they would libate into a particular keli, the water on the one hand and the wine on the other hand. Let me just take you through the imagery again. Here you see, for example, a top-down view, a plan of the Beis HaMikdash, including the Chatzer, where all the courtyard and the various rooms were. But when it comes into the main part of the Beis HaMikdash over here, you see a helicopter view of the Heichel, the sanctuary, from on top. And at the side of it over here, you see the Mizbeach, the altar, which is really quite a large keli, really, in the Beis HaMikdash. It's the largest, obviously, because it was a structure that even the Kohanim could walk up and down and around about, performing the avodah. And then we looked at a clearer picture of the Mizbeach on its own. And this is the west, and that was the east, and that's the north, and this is the south. The Gemara gave us all these directions because it was important to know at which point of the compass various avodot were carried out. And the libations were carried out in this corner. But as the Kohanim came up, and there were 2 vessels here, one here and one right at the edge, and one was for wine. The wine was poured into here, so it was libated into a kli. It wasn't libated onto the ground of the gag of the Mizbeach, and the water was libated into another kli. And the liquids didn't collect in these kelim, in these containers, but they actually drained down through holes at the bottom of the containers, through hollow pipes, if you like, that took it underground. And we'll be discussing those hollow pipes to a little bit more detail later on. And here you see a picture on top of here's the ramp top, and here's the top of the Mizbeach. And you can see here, there's one keli here, another keli here, and the libation. This is the wine libation. You can probably see that more clearly if I make it a bit larger, where you can see there's a colored liquid, a red liquid, which is coming out. that went into this container, which there was a hole that took the, it didn't collect in there, as I say, it was sort of piped down through the base of the Mizbeach as it came through the keli, and the water libation taken from the Shaluach pool was poured into this keli, which also drained down. So that's the story of the libations, Simchas Beis HaShoeva, the drawing of water and the drawing of wine, and how they then descended into the pits of the Mizbeach underneath. We'll now take up the Mishnah. The Mishnah is going to, Gemara is going to ask a question in terms of the authorship of the Mishnah. Who is the opinion of the Tana in the Mishnah? Remember, I said also, it's a detail I just didn't bring up a moment ago, I should have done, that the holes in the base of the two containers, the one for water and the one for wine, were of different diameters, such that it could be calculated that both containers of wine and water would drain by the same point in time. And so a calculation had to be made, taking into account the quantity of wine, the quantity of water, the viscosity, etc., so that they would drain into the bowels of the Mizbeach at the same time and be emptied at the same time. So it required a little bit of a calculation, or shall we say experimentation. That's what the Mishnah says. Now the Gemara comes to a wrong conclusion to start off. Let's see what the Gemara's conclusion will be. The Gemara says here as a question, Lema Masnisin. So here I'm taking you to about 8 lines or 8 or 9 lines from the bottom of 48b to the beginning of the line. Lema Masnisin Rabbi Yehudahi, below Rabbanon. Should we assume that the Mishnah is according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda and not according to the opinion of the Rabbanon? And the Gemara goes on to explain what we mean by this. Ditzanan, because it was taught in a Mishnah. In fact, it was the same Mishnah that we looked at, the very long Mishnah we looked at some while ago, but I'm not taking you back again to the script sheet for the Mishnah. It was taught in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Balog, Hoya Menasech Kol Shemona. Rabbi Yehuda held, was his opinion, there was a log. A log is a measure like a liter, a log of water that was used all 8 days. That was the volume that was used for the water libation, 1 log. The Rabbanon, because if this was the opinion of Rabbanon, ki hadoni ninhu, the volumes of both the water and the wine would be the same. Okay, I haven't explained that. That's only because the Gemara here hasn't explained itself. But the explanation is like this. There's a difference of opinion between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanon as to how much water, not how much wine, but how much water was used for this water libation that was taken up from the Shluach pool. What volume? According to the Rabbanon, the volume was 3 log of water and 3 log of wine. According to Rabbi Yehuda, only 1 log of water and 3 log of wine. So the Gemara's first question over here is, it only makes sense to say that the diameters of the 2 holes were different, the one for water as opposed to the one for wine, if we take the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Because since the objective was that they should all drain through that container at the same time, then since there was only 1 log of water and 3 log of wine, according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's obvious that you're going to have to make the wine aperture wider because there's 3 times as much wine to discharge. So clearly they would have to be different. But according to the Rabbanon, that there is the same volume of water, the same volume of wine, 3 log and both. Why should the apertures have been different? At this point, the Gemara doesn't understand the point of viscosity. The Gemara sees this as simply the same volume of water as of wine means naturally that both liquids will drain at the same rate. So why does the Mishnah say that one orifice was wider than the other? It must be the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. That's the Gemara. And the Gemara answers this, Afilu Teiba Rabbanon. You don't have to say that it's Rabbi Yehuda to try and explain why the 2 holes were of different diameter. There's a simple answer, and it's got to do with physics. It's got nothing to do with volume. You could even say this is the opinion of Rabbanan. The volume of water and the volume of the wine were the same. There were 3 log of each. Why did, therefore, the wine orifice have to be wider? It's because, says the Gemara, Chamra samich maya kalish, which really means wine. Chamra is wine, is thick. It is treacly. It is more viscous. Whereas maya kalish, whereas water is watery. What else can you say about water than to say it's watery? So the reason that there is a difference in diameter between the 2 holes is nothing to do with different volumes. It's to do with the rate at which these 2 types of liquid will discharge through a given orifice. And since wine is thicker, you need a slightly thicker orifice for the wine to ensure that it gets through and drains by the same time precisely as the water is drained. That's the Gemara's answer. This is Rabbanon, and it's simply to do with viscosity. That's the reason why there are 2 different measures for the size of the orifice. And the Gemara now gives a proof. You don't even need to accept what I say as being the answer. I can give you a source proof for this, says the Gemara. Hachinami mistabra. It's logical to say what we have just said, that there were the same volumes of wine and water. The only reason why the orifices were a different diameter is because wine and water at different rates of flow, different viscosities. De'i Rabbi Yehuda. Because if it really had been the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, this Mishnah had been of the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda that water was 3 log, 1 log, and the wine was 3 log. If that really had been, there was a 1, 2, 3 difference in volume between the 2 liquids, says the Gemara, Rachav v'kotza islay. We know Rabbi Yehuda to describe the different diameters of the 2 holes, as we'll see elsewhere in a brisa, doesn't use the terminology we see in our Mishnah, which is one is av and the other one is dak. Our Mishnah said one was av, thicker, and one was more dak. Right? Dak doesn't mean, the duck with quacks. Dak means thinner. Av b'dak. That's what our Mishnah says. If it were really the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda expressed in our Mishnah, who really holds there's a 3-to-1 different volume, then the terminology used would not be av and dak. It would be different. It would be katsar v'rachav, which we see, in Hebrew, katsar means short, small. Rachav means wide. How do we know that? So the Gemara brings a brisa in which Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is explicitly stated. Rabbi Yehuda holds that there is 3 times as much wine as there is water. He says the following: Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Rabbi Yehuda said, this is a quote of a brisa in Rabbi Yehuda's name. Shnei kashva ots hayu sham. What's a kashva? No one really knows. It's some kind of container. The containers that I showed you that were on the top of the mizbeach, one to contain the wine that came in, the other one the water. According to Rabbi Yehuda, they're given the terminology of kashva, so we don't need to worry about that at all. It's just using a different terminology. Those shnei kashvos hoyusham, one was for the wine and one was for the water, as the brisa carries on. Echad shel mayim, ve'echad shel yayin, 1 water, 1 wine. Shel yayin, the wine, kashva, the wine container, the hole at the bottom, piha, its orifice at the bottom to drain out the wine, rachav, was wide. Shel mayim, the orifice to drain out of the water, kashva, piha katsar, its orifice was very narrow. In other words, had a very narrow diameter. In order that at the end of the day, they would drain out at the same time. So what do you see from here? Rabbi Yehuda, when he describes the situation of the Mizbeach and the libations in his own words, uses the terminology rachav v'katzar, that the wine one had to be rachav, and the water one had to be katzar, which is a great big difference in width, if you like, because according to Rabbi Yehuda, the wine had 3 times the amount of volume of the water. So you're really going to have to make 3 times the area at least. So that's why he uses the terminology Rachav Katzar. But according to the Chacham, they're the same volume. The difference is only in viscosity. The terminology to be applied more appropriately that we find in our Mishnah is not Rachav Katzar, but Av and Dak. Okay, so we've learned a little bit here about terminology, and the Gemara says, Shema Mina, we do indeed conclude from this that our Mishnah, which used the terminology Av Dak, was according to the opinion of the majority, which is the Chachamim Rabbanan, who say that the volumes were the same. And the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda was elsewhere, but it's not the opinion of our Mishnah. Our Mishnah's terminology points to its authorship being that of the Rabbanan and not Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, the Gemara goes on to say, Ma morov, ma rovo shel mayim, etc. This is another quote from the Mishnah, and the Gemara brings now a brisa, Tov Reish Tov Rabbanon, the middle of the third line from the bottom. Our rabbis taught. What's coming next is a longer version of the story that we mentioned in our Mishnah. If you remember, our Mishnah brought a story of how they had to be very careful to show what they were doing, the Kohanim, because we didn't trust them. There were some Kohanim who were Sadducee Kohanim who actually poured out the wine onto their feet, or the water onto their feet, rather than into the keli, because they didn't believe in this whole libation ceremony during Sukkot, because it's not mefurash, it is not explicit in the Torah, and they only believed really in carrying out explicit Torah commands, and not rabbinic or even prophet-given instructions or rituals. So they made a joke of it by pouring it on their feet. We will see this story repeated now. So let's see how the Brisa pictures this event. Maaser, this is a Tosefta, this is from a Brisa, and it's similar to the Mishnah, but more explicit. Maaser bitstuki echad. It once happened. Maaser always means it's a Maaser. In Yiddish, I've got a Maaser for you. It's a story. Maaser bitstuki echad, which happened with one Siduki. He was a Kohen, and he was performing the water libation during Sukkot, right? And even the Tzedukim had Kohanim. In fact, they liked the idea of being Kohanim. The problem was that they determined the way they would do things would be different to the way a Kohen should do things as we understand them from our Chachamim. But nevertheless, they were still there. They were mixing in. And this Tzeduki once, B'Tzeduki Echad, Shenisach al Gabe Raglov, he poured the water libation deliberately on his feet. And perhaps he hoped that people wouldn't see. So he went, but he deliberately did it. If you think that doing something isn't right and you're a Tzeduki, you don't want to do it according to the way the sages asked you to do it. You deliberately want to show that you don't follow the edicts of the sages. And that's what he did. So he poured it onto his feet and not into the container in which he was supposed to have poured it. So he was on top of the Mizbeach, 10 feet up, and this is what he did. Uragamuhu kola'am be'esro gehen. And it was during Sukkot, the Brisa says, all the people who observed him, there were a lot of spectators. You know, people come up on Sukkot from Chutzarats, from Miami, and all parts of the world. So they used to come up Aliyah L'Regel as well. And when they did Aliyah L'Regel, they could actually observe the ceremony such as this, on the Mizbeach, at least the Yisraelim who were Tahar, and they were men, they could come in further. So there might have been a big crowd of onlookers. And when they observed that Tzeduki deliberately, so to speak, sabotaging the ritual, what did they do? They were angry. He took his life in his hands, did this Tzeduki. So they stoned him with their esrogim, rugamohu kol ha'am esrogein. They had their lulav and esrog in hand. So the only thing they could find was a projectile, so to speak, to throw at those Kohanim, or that Kohen on the Mizbeach, on the roof of Mizbeach, was their esrog. As Rashi and other commentators explain later on, if you look at the story in greater detail now, it seems they didn't just throw their shrogim, they actually threw stones. You know, early stone throwing event over here. You know, people don't just throw stones at cars on Rehov Bar Ilan and Shabbos, but they used to throw stones as well at a misbehaving Kohen because they did great damage. the onlookers who were pelting the Kohen did collateral damage to the Mizbeach. And that's what the Brisa carries on to say. For Oso Hayom, on that day, Nifkamor Keren HaMizbeach, one of the horns, that horn at the point close to where the libations were taking place, was badly damaged. And what did they do? And I'll show you a little bit in closer detail, so we'll see what's going on. Veheviu bol shel melach. So they brought a fistful of salt. I'm not sure exactly why this is salt. It's some form of limey material, maybe. Usasamuhu, and they bunged up the holes, the cracks that had appeared at the corners of the Mizbeach, which had been impacted by these stones and esrogim and were damaged. Not because by placing salt and, a quick bandage aid on the corners of the Mizbeach, they made it fit for the avoda. In fact, they didn't. The Mizbeach was pasul. It could not be used until it was properly repaired. So why did they do this quick band-aid sellotape repair? Interesting idea, because it wasn't aesthetically right to leave the Mizbeach in its damaged state. Sometimes what you do is you do a cosmetic repair. They did a cosmetic repair because it wasn't right to allow the Mizbeach to be seen in its damaged state, even though that cosmetic repair didn't render the Mizbeach now fit for use. It had to be properly repaired before it could be used. And I'm just going to move on to the top of Mem Tet Omad Aleph 49a, if you've got the second sheet, and then I'll take you through some of the detailed construction of the Mizbeach, so you can see how we can reconstruct the Mizbeach, please God, in a short period of time. Shekol Mizbeach, if we carry on to the top of 49a, every altar, every Mizbeach, she'ein lo, that may not have or has not in good state of repair, lo kevesh, neither a ramp, below keren, or it may have no corner, the keren which got damaged, below yesod, nor does it have a full and complete base, below rivua, or nor does it have a complete square shape, the square shape on the top of the Mizbeach, pasul la'avoda, is pasul for avoda. And therefore, if a keren, which is one of those things over here, is damaged, it's considered to be a pasul. The Mizbeach can't be used. And the only thing you can do is cosmetically fix it until it is properly repaired. Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda, Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda goes and he makes an addition. He says it also has to have af hasovev, also the surrounding rim perimeter along which the Kohanim used to walk in order to do their service on the top of the Mizbeach. So I'll share my screen with you, and we shall have to take a tour, if I can find it, here, of the Mizbeach. On this, I'm grateful to, I think, one of the best diagrams you see in Art Scroll. Art Scroll diagrams are not very good, usually. Usually find I can do a better job myself. They usually confuse you somewhere, like a deliberate mistake somewhere or deliberate confusion. Now, this is from a Hebrew Art Scroll, that's why you see all this, but it's actually a diagram, and I've blown it up. Maybe I should just make it a bit smaller. Okay. So here's the Mizbeach from a slightly different angle. Here's the ramp. This is the kevesh. This is the gag, the roof, the flat roof on the Mizbeach, where the korban are due to be. And you remember when I showed you the libation ceremony, it would happen in this corner. There'd have been this canister over here, which was for the wine, this one for the water, and they would pour into the water container, and the wine container would drain down through those special cavities. That's where the particular service was done. It was over here. And now I'll show you some of the other parts. The Yesod is really a base. There were actually 3 slabs that made up the Mizbeach. There was the bottom slab, which was the Yesod. There's a middle slab over here, on which was the Sovev, and then there was the top, and that's how you can see it going in. Now, the bottom one, the Yesod, isn't too clear over here, but let's not focus on that. What you see over here, can you see? There is this surrounding rim. Now that rim actually is probably about 18 inches wide, 2 feet wide. This is a very big structure. And when the Kohanim did their avodah, generally, they would walk up the ramp, then they'd walk along this little trick thing over here and walk along this rim called the sovev, which goes around. That's why it's called sovev. It goes salviv, goes all the way around, and then they'd come back over here. They would not walk on the floor of the roof of the Mizbeach, otherwise they burn their feet with coal, etc., etc. So if they had a need for a korban to sprinkle the blood somewhere, or if they needed to stoke up the flames, or whatever it is, then they would walk along this edge. They had to have a good sense of balance. You know, I might imagine any Kohen suffering from vertigo would quickly retire. But apart from that, there was enough room for them to walk. They would walk bare feet along here. And then when they came down, remember I told you last week, they would generally walk this way, around here, and come back along here, except one of the exceptions was for the libations, where we said they actually went on the left and they went straight to the left. They didn't go right. They didn't keep doing the anti-clockwise navigation. So for the libations, they would just go up and go straight left. But this is the sovev. So we've learned that certain elements of the Mizbeach from this brisa are absolutely necessary. Otherwise, the Mizbeach is pasul. We said if there's no kevesh, this ramp, if it was a staircase, for example, or a ladder, you couldn't use this Mizbeach, even though you could get to the top, because the Mizbeach, Chachamim said, requires a ramp of access. So it's necessary. And then the next was keren. And here the kronos, the corners, these were about 2 feet high, 1.5, 2 feet high, and they were cubes as well. So that's how wide they were, about 1.5 feet by 1.5 feet by 1.5 feet, I think 1 amma. And this is the corner that is nearest where the libations took place. So you can imagine on that nasty day when this naughty Kohen, who was a Tzeduki, decided to pour the water over his feet rather than into the water canister, he was standing over here, and all the audience and the were seeing him maybe from here, and they were all trying to pelt him. And as they pelted him, the projectiles they flung hit these corner pieces, these projecting corner pieces, which are also necessary, according to the brisa, as a component of the Mizbeach, damaged them, and as a result, the whole Mizbeach would become possible, but they quickly cosmetically healed them by placing some cement-like material quickly around the stonework to make it look at least respectable from the outside. So that's the story. These are the kronos that were really necessary. We also said that it needed to be rivua, it needed to be square. So you couldn't make a rectangular one. The roof had to be square, and it needed to be pointed square, not curved ends, a bit like tefillin, you know, it has to have a certain shape. And according to Rabbi Yosef bar Yehuda, the sovev, this circumnavigating rim along which the Kohanim would walk, was also a necessary part, which means if it broke somewhere, you couldn't use the Mizbeach. Not because the Kohanim might not find a way to walk across, they might be able to step across the breach, but because a break in the sovev, according to Rabbi Yosef bar Yehuda, also means that the Mizbeach becomes pasul. Okay, so we've seen what the Mishnah was talking about and what the brisa now gave us in greater detail, that this Kohen tried to do something he shouldn't do, and collateral damage was caused to the horn. And this is the story that the Mishnah brought and which the Gemara has just brought out in greater detail. Second, let's see where I am. Okay, I know where I am. I'm going to stop sharing now. I'm going to go back to the Gemara. More interesting Gemara to come. In the Mishnah, much earlier on, which we might have forgotten by now, mention was made of the shittin. Let me just share screen again for a quick moment. As I said, the water and the wine libation would go down channels, hewn out channels, down into a cavity, if you like, be beneath the level of the Mizbeach. That's how they used to drain. Whether they came out anywhere in some sort of pool, I'm not sure. But the point is they did not accumulate on, sometimes when you think of a libation, you think the libation is, sometimes libations on the meat, but these libations were libations into kalim. And they actually then drained themselves. So if you picked up the kali over here, as I said, either one of these two, after the draining, they would be empty. They might actually have been, these two kali may actually have been fixed to the floor, I'm not sure, but if they were not, you pick them up, you'd see a great big aperture at the base, which was because the kalim were placed exactly over the, if you like, the halal, the hole in the ground down which they drained. And the Mishnah called the if you like, the draining cavities under the Mizbeach, shittin. Shin Yud, Tof Yud Nun. It's not the same as Atse Shittin, you know, acacia wood, a completely different word. Shittin here really means, if you like, some sort of carved out channel. That's what it really means. So the Gemara expects you to know that, just what I told you, and goes on to explain how we know that there were these shittin and who designed these shittin. And we get into a rather strange piece of the Gemara. So let's start it now. We're on Omer Rabba Bar Bar Chana. So this is the third line down, fourth line from the end. Omer Rabbi Yochanan. Rabba Bar Bar Chana said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, he gave us this following Agadah. We accept it as Agadah. Let me just stop sharing from this moment. It's a distraction to me as well. So he says the following: Shittin misheshes yumei bereshis nibra'u. Surprising statement. The shittin, these channels that go down to a cavity below, it's not clear to me whether I imagine that it's the cavity below the Mizbeach, which is really being called the shittin. If you like, there is a pipe, if you like, at the top of the Mizbeach, the roof, that led down, and there's a cavity under the Mizbeach, which is where all this gathered. So under the base of the Mizbeach, once it had flowed down to the level of the ground, it goes further underground into what is called shittin. No one really knows exactly what the shape was, some sort of cavern, some sort of pool, I don't know. And Rabbi Yochanan said those shittin, that is the cavity below ground into which that water was collected, is Misheshes Yimei Bereshis Nibrahu. It was created by HaKadosh Baruch Hu at the time of Brias HaOlam. You find similar medrashim on some other aspects of Bahar Bayis, but we're focusing now on the cavity below the Mizbeach. That was created by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, carved out by HaKadosh Baruch Hu at the time of the creation. In other words, it was not made by the architects who built the Mizbeach. It was not improved and worked on. It was something that was naturally always there, awaiting the arrival of the Mizbeach, you might say. Because before the Mizbeach was there was nothing to drain into it. But somehow that cavity was there, Misheshes Yumei Bereshis. I can't give you any more of a explanation of how that could be and what it looked like before the Mizbeach was there. The Mizbeach was only there from the time of Shlomo HaMelech. It wasn't there before. And what happened between creation and then? What did the ground look like in that area? That I can't tell you. How do we know? How do we know it was there from Sheshes and Me'abreshis? So clearly there is a tradition that this is a God-formed cavity, for whatever reason, whatever mystical reason that we have for this particular thought. But the Gemara is going to bring a posuk. It's going to bring a posuk from Shir HaShirim. Shir HaShirim, anyway, the Song of Songs, is as difficult as you can get. But the proof the Gemara brings here, Rabbi Yochanan's name, is about as difficult as you can make a drosha from Shir HaShirim. So let's scratch our heads and try and understand it. The posuk says in Shir HaShirim, Chamuke Yirei Chayach. Chamuke Yirei Chayach. Let's have a look at this posuk in detail. It's not easy. So let me share screen. Okay, I'm sharing. Let's go beyond, below. Okay, very famous posuk, as posukim go actually. We'll leave it like that. It starts like this beautiful posuk. Ma yofu pa'amayach bana olim bas nadiv. Chamuke yireichayach kemo chaloim ma'aseh yedei omon. So here's this, it's the Safaria translation. In other words, it's straightforward, literally, whether it means anything to you is irrelevant. This is how it's translated. How lovely are your feet in sandals, right? Very nice, nice feet. Ma yofu, how lovely. Pa'amayach. Pa'amayach means when you take strides, if you like. It doesn't really mean the feet, but when you take a stride, it uses the word. You take a stride with your feet. Bana olim, shoes, sandals at that time rather than shoes, you would say. Bas nadiv, and a div is a noble person. Bas nadiv is the daughter of nobles. All very well so far. Next, it becomes much harder. Chamuke yireichayach, I've translated in the same colors. You can see what translates as what. Your rounded thighs. Well, I don't really know that's the right translation. Yireichayach means your thighs. Does chamuke mean rounded? I've no idea. But it's irrelevant because the Gemara is going to completely take this posuk apart in a different way. So we don't need to focus on Safaria. Your rounded thighs are kamo chaloim, another difficult word, are like jewels. There seems to be a translation of chaloim like jewels. Don't forget that Shir HaShirim literally is a sort of a love story. So we're talking about beautiful women and men, who see these lovely women. We know it's supposed to be a moshel, a parable really, for the love of Klal Yisrael and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's a love affair between the Jewish people and God. But simply translating it, this is where we are. So your rounded thighs are like jewels. Chamuke yirechai kamo chalam, maaseh yedei aman, the work of a master's hand. As if a person would say to a woman, who he very much loves, that she has beautiful thighs that look like jewels, and only a master jeweler could have made thighs that look as beautiful as this. So that's how you translate it if you were a simple romantic poet. So how's the Gemara, now how's this Gemara in the name of Rabbi Yochanan going to prove from here? That's what it wants to do. This posuk is going to be the source to demonstrate that the shittin, the underground cavern, wherever it is beneath the Mizbeach, was produced by HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the Sheshes Yimei Bereishis during the 6th day of creation. If you can see it over here, raise your hand, because the Gemara is going to have to try and bring out a rabbit, a white rabbit from a hat to prove that this is the source for the divine nature of the shittim. And here is the white rabbit. Okay, so the Gemara says, it's done like this. I've done the yellow again. Can you see where the translation of Chamuke Yirechayach from Safaria was your rounded thighs? The Gemara, I'll do it in the Gemara in a moment, but it is going to translate it as Chamuke Yirechayach is referring to the shittin, the cavern, if you like, which is concealed beneath the Mizbeach. That's Chamuke Yirechayach. How so? What is the relationship between rounded thighs? So the Gemara wants to say that Yerech, Yirechayach, is something, it refers to, if you like, a part of a woman that shouldn't really be seen. So therefore, we're referring to the underground of the Mizbeach, which you don't see. And how do we know it's the underground of the Mizbeach, and not the underground of a railway station? Because Yirechayach, an expression used in the Torah many times to describe parts of the Mizbeach, it says Yerech HaMizbeach, the thigh of the Mizbeach. So now it begins to come to life in the drash. Chamuke Yirechayach. What about concealed? I said that the thighs are meant to be concealed. There is a translation that Rashi brings that shows Chamuke can mean something which is not seen, the concealed. Okay, now we've got a new pshat. The concealed part of your Mizbeach, which is known as a Yerech, which is what? The shittin. The shittin is under the Mizbeach. The Mizbeach above ground, like the iceberg above ground, is not concealed. So we must be talking about something which is low down, like the thigh, and which is concealed, which must mean if you like, the cavern underneath the Mizbeach. It's so obvious, isn't it? If you're a darshan in the Gemara, to get to that. So now we know that this phrase, Chamuka Yerechach, refers to those that shittim, that cavern or whatever it is underneath the Mizbeach. Kamo Chaloim, what does Kamo Chalolim mean? Well, we said over here like jewels, but the Gemara is not going to have any of that in its drush. Are carved out. How do we know that? Because, and if that does make sense, because Chalul comes from something which means a hold. Chalul is actually a flute because you hole out and you carve out the center of a tube, etc. So chaloim, kamo chaloim, are carved out, is as if they were carved out. Oh, we're getting somewhere now. The shittim, which are concealed beneath the mizbeach, are carved out. Maaseh yedei oman, we said the work of a master's hand. What greater master is it? The work of God's craftsmanship. All proven. Quod erat demonstratum. So we see over here that the shittim, which are concealed beneath the mizbeach, have been carved out as a work of God's craftsmanship. And we see it from this Chamuk Yerechah Kamo Chaloim Maaseh yedei oman. Now the question is whether you're particularly convinced. Are you convinced that that is a fair and full and final and irrefutable proof that the mizbeach, the shittim underneath were created from Sheishes Yumei Bereishis by the master artisan, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is the way the Gemara has learned it drastically. Don't forget, there would have been a tradition, and some of these traditions obviously date from very much earlier. And the Gemara has given you here, as we said very often, a drush, a very beautifully carved out drush, really, of a posuk of Shir Shirim, which is difficult enough to understand anyway, to show how that can be used as a remez, at least, a hint, an indication that the shittim were God's creation. They were part of his master craftsmanship. So that's how the Gemara proves it from this statement over here. So let's go back to the Gemara here. I'll take it from the beginning again, just to show you those words, because I described it really in my sheet. But let's see how the Gemara has fitted this together. So these shittim, this carved out area beneath the Mizbeach, emanate from the 6 days of creation. Shenerma, as the posuk in Shir Shirim indicates, based upon this very sophisticated drush that I've just explained. Chamuka Yerechayach, Kamo Chaloim Maaseh yedei oman. So and he goes on to explain, which I gave it to you in my own words. Chamuka Yerechayach. What does it mean, Chamuka Yerechayach? Doesn't mean rounded thighs. It means Elo HaShittim. This refers to the shittim underneath the Mizbeach, because they are covered over and they're concealed and they're low down, which is the shittim, like a thigh. Kamo chaloim, what does it mean, kamo chaloim? It means shem muchololim, that they are hollowed out, a chalal. Chalal means outer space. Halal, what is halal, whatever it's called, outer space. Halal, it means this. Outer space is another word for outer space in modern Ivrit. It's a cavity, it's an empty area, which is these shittim are an empty area below the Mizbeach, the Yordan ad had tahom, and they descend. The Gemara actually adds these words. They descend unto the bottomless pit. We don't really know what the tahom really is. Really, to a bottomless void. And they are Maaseh yedei oman. What does it mean? Zumase yedei umonoso shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is the work of craft of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Oman, the craftsman, is HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. So that's a rather sweet proof. The Gemara is going to make another statement to show in a moment that the shittim were God created, taken from a different verse. But this is the first verse that we're seeing to prove it. And as I say, I think it probably means that there was such a tradition. And to back up that tradition, Chazal have very beautifully interpreted a verse in Shir HaShirim. I want to, as this is Talmud and Technicolor, I want to show you something quite amusing. Only Talmud and Technicolor can show you things that is amusing. So, which you probably wouldn't get in a rabbinical shir. However, it is very kosher v'yosher, and it's based upon this posuk. and the beginning of the posuk rather than the end. The right eye was concentrating on the yellow, the green, and the blue. There's these beautiful words. Ma yofu pa'amayach banolim bas nadir. How lovely are your feet in sandals, O daughter of nobles. Let's just translate it like that, because what I'm going to show you very much uses the verse in its literal translation as we've just translated it. How beautiful are your steps or your feet in shoes, you daughter of nobles. So here we are. You won't have seen this before. It's the first public airing in about 130 years of this letter, which is a letter only to be found in Adele's family's archives. And I have made no mention to it in my famous book, The Rabbi Suitcase, because this is not as serious as some of the other stuff that I put into that book, which is a description of all the archives of famous letters and Shilas and Chuvas, etc., that were dealt with by Adele's great-grandfather and great-great-grandfather when they were Dayanim on the London-based inn and the Manchester-based inn in between about 1870 and 1895. We're going back 130 years or so. So one of the letters there is using this posuk, but in such a charming way that you can only chuckle. And the person who's written this letter, and you can see his name, I'm sure you can read letter script, very rabbinical Hebrew, very easily. It took me two years or so before I could master the majority of letters in their original state. Here's his signature at the bottom. Nun Fei Taf Lamed Yud, Hey Lamed Vav Yud, Naftali Halevi. So he's the writer of this letter, and he's writing this letter to Dayan Sussman Cohen in the 1880s. Who is a Dayan first on the Manchester-based inn, then on the London-based inn, under Herman Adler, the chief rabbi at the time. And Naftali Halevi had a nice relationship with Dayan Sussman Cohen. And Dayan Sussman Cohen's daughter was about to get married. And he wanted to send some gifts to the Chosson and to the Kala. Now, Naftali Halevi himself is a very interesting character. He's extraordinarily interesting because he got almost driven out of Orthodox life in London at the time by a set of Kanoim, of zealots. There were even zealots in London 130 years ago. It seems surprising at a time when you think zealotry hadn't yet started, in London certainly, but there were zealots. And the context here is that Naftali Halevi, who was a Talmud Chacham, and he was from Russia, he had come to London, but he got very interested also in the sciences. He was one of these maskilim, not a maskil in terms of being anti-religious. He was Haredi in the extreme, but he was interested in reading modern science. And this is the time shortly after Darwin's work. He wrote on the survival of species, natural selection, etc. And Naftali Halevi had read Darwin's books, and he was fascinated by them. And he started to write pamphlets and books in which he lauded and applauded Charles Darwin for his work, saying that they gave new meaning to Genesis and also to the Midrashim on Sefer Bereshis. And he wrote books on them. And those managed to come to the attention of some zealots who condemned him. And it caused all sorts of problems. Naftali Halevi almost had to live on a park bench because he was driven out. There were notices on shul walls saying this man cannot be allowed into town, even though he had long payas and everything else, it made no difference, because it seemed that he was understanding Genesis in a scientific way and not in the Chumash way anymore. Anyway, this particular controversy hasn't gone away in 130 years. And this is the very, very first example of a drive out of town. Naftali Halevi was driven out of town. However, Dayan Sussman Cohen was very friendly with him and was very, very, I would say, felt sorry for him and the way in which he'd been treated. And therefore he continued to correspond, even while he was in hiding almost, he continued to correspond with Sussman Cohen and try to be mesameach him in every time there was a family simcha. So let me read you this letter. I'm sorry about that introduction, but he's one of the most interesting characters people don't know about. So this is part of the letter. I mean, it starts much higher, but he goes on to say, V'hayom hazeh, I'm going to read you rabbinical Hebrew. There you are. V'hayom hazeh, I'm right at the top. Shalachti matana lehachosen. Today, he says to Sussman Cohen, I have sent a gift to your new son-in-law to be, the chosen. What have I sent? Es ha'Ein Yaakov, the Sefer Ein Yaakov, famous book which we still have in our shelves today, al davar Kodesh Naftali, which he has his own commentary on. Naftali HaLevi was a Talmud Chacham written Pirushim, poor man, and he still got into trouble. And he sent that to the Chosen because he wanted his Chosen to read a book that he'd written, which was a kosher v'yosher sefer. There's no problem about that. Uba'at HaKala, for the color, to the color, I have sent HaKala Bas Nadiv, the daughter of a noble person, because the daughter of Dayan Sussman Cohen is the daughter of a noble person. And Nadiv, because Dayan Sussman Cohen is a noble person. I have sent minalim, a pair of shoes as a wedding present. And he says where he bought it from. Me base, I'm not sure, McCraig's or McCraig. It was obviously a shoe shop called McCraig. So she could always take it back to the shoe shop, McCraig, if it didn't fit her. He had no idea, never seen her before. So he buys her a pair of shoes and he sends them as a gift. It's the sort of thing we tend not to do as wedding presents. Why does he do that? In order to fulfill the pasuk that we've just been dealing with, Shir HaShirim, and here is the quote and the source, Ma yofu pamayich ben alim bas nadiv. That pasuk that we saw before, yes, it fulfills this pasuk. How lovely are your feet in sandals, O daughter of nobles. Have you ever seen such a beautiful thought as that? And this is the wedding presents he provides. I don't know what Dayan Sussman Cohen's would have thought when she opened up this box or whatever it is, and these shoes that might not have fit her, it might have been grotesque anyway, had arrived, but with an accompanying posuk, Ma yofu pamayach banolim basnadiv. That if you look at some of the writings of Rabbonim and various learned people at that time, they used psukim in this beautiful, charming way. This is not entirely unique. You say, why is he using this? And it's a charming way of, I would say, it's not misusing it. He really felt that a good Jewish girl who was bas nadiv, to present her with a pair of shoes, is a fulfillment of this pasuk. So we've learned several things about this pasuk today. Whoops, I can't. Got a bug over here. I'm going to stop sharing before that bug. Okay. Now this is interesting. I'll try and get back to this. I'm bugged. I shouldn't have said what I said. I think it's because I disclosed a letter I shouldn't have disclosed, because I'm finding my cursor is moving me endlessly and I don't have any clickability to stop sharing. Okay, let me just go on for a minute or two. Actually, I will need something from here anyway. The Gemara goes on to say, as a slightly different proof, Tana Debei Rabbi Yishmael, the school of Rabbi Yishmael actually taught, go back, the school of Rabbi Yishmael actually taught, how do we know that the Shittim were created in the 7 days of creation? It's obvious, isn't it? Have you seen this verse before? Bereshis bara Elohim es hashamayim es haaretz. So Rabbi Yishmael says, Bereshis, al tikri Bereshis, don't read this first word as Bereshis, but read it split in two, yellow and blue. Bara, shit, bara Elohim. So at the very beginning, yes, I hope you're happy with that. It's much easier than the drasha of Shir HaShirim. At that time in creation, he was Borashit. That's the very first thing HaKadosh Baruch Hu created, is this cavity beneath the Mizbeach. It's there at the very first 2 words of the Chumash. This is what the Gemara says over here. Okay, we go on with the Gemara. We won't go on right now. I'm not sure I even know how to stop my particular transmission, because I've got paralysis in the, I really don't know. I'm going to try lots of different things. I may have got, no, I thought I had. I've lost contact with Zoom. That seems to be what's happening. Are you still there? Oh yeah, you are still there. I thought maybe I wasn't transmitting either. Okay. I'm not sure what I can do right now. The best thing that you can do, Aboisai, is to leave the session. I'm not sure I can actually terminate the session. So I might have this going on forever. I might have to switch my machine off and come back on again because I'm paralyzed. But we won't take it any further today. And please God, next week we'll pick this up again.
Okay, Ellie, we're going to have to put shoes on the wedding list now, are we? Yeah. Sandals?
That's right, sandals. And maybe sandals.
That's a thing.
It's a good idea on the wedding list. Okay.
Well, why didn't we do it on ours then?
I haven't read the letters because I haven't married you yet, and they're your letters. Okay. Be well, everybody. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. I have to stop this. I managed.